Now that is a fantastically full-bodied interpretation, Noel. Yeah, I mean it's you were one of the first people to send me a score, and now you are one of the last people to be evaluated, and I apologize for that delay. I'm thinking of maybe rejigging the whole order in which I interpret or, excuse me, evaluate the entries that are sent to me next year because it just seems like a long time to wait for a lot of people, and especially if something happens in the course of my work, which is what happened this year. I'll explain more in next month's finale event. But yeah, it just it's a situation where people who I was clients I was working with, and some other situations. The timing changed, and it changed again, and then it changed again. Okay, and it was a situation where I like the things that I had planned to do, like the lovely rhythm of how these evaluations should go, just became impractical. And then on top of that, I had YouTube's at the time when I was trying to regain the momentum. YouTube suddenly started taking 2 to 3 days to process videos, which now has gone back to normal. But man, I mean, so many things went wrong at once. But it just seems unfair to me to make you wait so long when you probably sat down and you worked on it immediately, and now here we are 6 months later or 5 months later. So anyhow, without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about how your score is working here. Okay, and if you have missed the more recent run of these last couple dozen evaluations, I'm starting at the end and I'm working my way back because I feel that way we can look at the most at the freshest content, the parts that have not been orchestrated as much by the rest of the community. So starting right here at E, this is the fade out where the pianist hits the chord and then removes the notes. Like everything decays halfway through the bar, and then they remove the notes that they don't need to play anymore, and then the octave G's in the piano anyway continue onwards. Now here you're only going, octave B's. So here you're just playing a unison first and third player. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at. Yeah, so you could have also had the second and fourth continue to play and fade out while the first player continued on. I think it's cool that you go suddenly. I think you should say piano subito here, just to really underline the fact that it's a very sudden change. And I think it's really great that you marked a like the destination dynamic for the rest of the orchestra. Yeah, here I noticed that you're using a buzz roll for the snare drum. Perhaps that's a way of you getting the right effect. I'm not sure that it's any different from just the standard triple beam tremolo bars there. So don't use a buzz roll, I would say. And it's um, a buzz roll is just like the would be the drummer using like the power of gravity and bounce to and here's a situation where it actually would work on a snare drum, but I still feel that you just use a standard, the standard roll of the snare drum would probably work a little bit better there. Yeah, I think you missed some diminuendo marks here. Yeah, you don't want this. You don't want these strings. Like you could hear it in the mock-up. You don't want the strings to stay powerful and then suddenly drop off. Okay, because that doesn't set up this very much. Now, something that you could have done is held the B's till this bar and then have them fade out, because I think you might be working with a earlier version of the template where I supplied the piano part, but I forgot to put in the tie, I think, on the just the very earliest one, and I noticed that I was using an earlier version of the template that I had not completely proofread, and rather than the final one, somehow that the wrong file got uploaded, and then I went back and I fixed it. So later entries don't have that problem. But this is something that you could have done here. Is like if you had really wanted your violins and horns to continue on for another bar with a tie and so on, then I think that would have been perfectly fine. I love the fourth horn solo here. Could also be a second horn solo. Okay, so so here you're fading out and you're holding. Just so long as you're aware that the sound of the stopped horn here is going to be even kind of more squashed and unpleasant than it is in the mock-up. Kind of interesting. Uh, these rests did not get Vermata marks over them. Anyways, that would be something that you should go through and fix. Okay, but anyways, all that is immaterial. Let's just continue on. Now here you have contrabassoon, tuba, and double bass all on the same pitches. And I'm just kind of wondering if you are aware that the solo bass player is going to be so much quieter than like either of these two players. They will just basically get their part will be so have so much less strength that they'll just basically get absorbed right into the sound of these two instruments without contributing a lot. Now, if you had the entire section playing, that's a different story. Yeah, but it's almost a situation where, once again, the tuba is so powerful that I would actually mark it pianissimo and have the contrabassoon and the section double basses play. Then you would get a beautifully balanced sound. But the way that it is now, mostly what you'll hear is just tuba. And then there will be a little bit of grumbly contrabassoon combined with it, and then just the tiniest wisp of double bass solo right in here. Yeah. The other issue too is that you are importing the articulation style of the piano into your score, all tenutos on everything. Okay. Now that might work fine on the piano part, where you get like these slightly emphasized, slightly blocky notes, but on the winds, brass, and strings, it is a completely different thing. It is like a full note. I mean, it's really blocky. It's like turning. It's like a button. It's like pressing a button where the sound turns on and off, rather than having the beautiful shape of the articulation on each note, right? Now, I've been sort of singing these and going over them to the point where people are kind of kidding me too much about it. So just listen to, check out some of the recent evaluations. Like, just check out like the last half dozen evaluations. But there's like a real, like every note is full bodied without articulation, and it goes on and it goes on and on and on. And it doesn't matter that you have it marked pianissimo and mezzo piano and so on and so forth. It's still going to lack the sense of nuance that really could be really beautiful. Whereas you could be turning this into portato and have a nice pulsing kind of a sound, like just add a slur to these to each group of tenuto notes, or you could just slur it and get rid of the tenuto marks and have a beautiful just a much more beautiful phrase or slur. So yeah, so just really watch out about, especially I think the tenuto mark right? I just think that it is so different from instrument to instrument. I mean, even different between its application in winds and brass compared to strings, right? That the technique is just completely different, right? Here the player turns the breath on with the attack, and it just basically stays solid, and then it lets go. And sometimes if you have three of them in a row, there can be a kind of almost a robotic kind of legato, where each note is just like leads to the next one smoothly, yes, but without any kind of nuance or change or shape. Especially getting to the end of the tenuto marks, it just kind of turns off. And whereas in string instruments, the bowing, you just have these really really long bows, and they're nice and full, and sometimes they can connect in a seeming legato, but it just has this just almost, it's almost like a sword slashing through, you know, it's even softly. It lacks the kind of nuance and expression. So just really, really watch out for that, okay? I think that's going to have to make it into our next list of common scoring errors. I feel it is an error, so just really watch out for that. Okay, so we have our first little bit of the solo. Then the next phrase picks up with a unison of cellos, bass trombone, and bass clarinet. So once again, you have the brass instrument being incredibly powerful compared to its partners. Yeah, I would say even more so than the tuba here. So bass clarinet and bass trombone. The bass trombone wins hands down. Even with everybody controlling what they're playing and so on at the same dynamic, the bass trombone will easily win out in this group. And once again, you have a solo cello, right? So the solo cello is, 1/10 as strong as the bass trombone, right? So just like I would say, section cellos and bass clarinet at piano with the bass trombone at pianissimo, and then you've got a shot. And this is lovely too, the horn coming in. And once again, horn in this middle register, sort of lower middle register, coming in with the cello, a solo cello, it will overwhelm the solo cello player with them both at the same dynamic. Even with pianissimo in the horn, the solo cello will tend to get overwhelmed. So really, section cellos and horn here. That will make a beautiful combination. And then coming up here to solo, English horn. And here's an even stronger reason for the horn to be pianissimo is that you are doing a dovetail into the English horn part. So the comparative strength of these two voices is 2-to-1, right? So what you'll hear is just a sudden reduction of force. If this is pianissimo, you solve the problem, right? So the English horn will be coming in here at piano along with the violas, which is perfectly fine blend, a good dynamic balance. And the horn coming in at pianissimo, it will match the English horn, whereas the section cellos will match section violas, right? Once again, solo viola plus English horn, the English horn wins, right? So you've set up by putting these putting underpowered solo string parts alongside, nicely scored winds, but very powerful brass, even at piano. Right. So the way to solve all of this is pianissimo, brass, section strings across all these parts. Okay, so now we get to this part right in here, and I would say if you're going to transition to English horn and oboe taking the melody here, fade out your violas here so that the sound, like, you don't have a sudden drop off in the sound here. Okay, and and once again, I mentioned before about tenuto, so you have a lot of doot 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 kind of sounds here rather than da da. You really want this to be delicate and emotional. I mean, especially if when you get to the Doloroso here, which you left out that marking. Why did you leave out Doloroso? Doloroso, he's dolorous. He is sad. He's melancholic. He is feeling some kind of pain, right? He just went through this agony before the E section, and now he's sort of left almost like empty, shell-shocked, bereft. But somehow hope starts to seep back in, and he ends in a beautiful way. All right. Here you keep your melody in front of your accompaniment, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's exactly the way to do it. Now, about my only caveat here is that you have a tendency to pile on more and more texture. And, it's not to say that it doesn't work fine in its own way, but I saw this approach in several other passages where it just gets denser and thicker and bigger and more intense. So, if that's part of your orchestration style, I'm not going to say that it's wrong to do that all the time. Though you might, there's a few things you might want to watch out for. Yeah, so be careful that numbers like this don't drop down too far, because it almost looks like you're saying second bass clarinet, right? Try to keep things a little tighter vertically, if you can. And of course, I think I reorganized this page. The original score, I think, was had really small staff size. I'd have to go and take a look. I know I did some editing and so on. Now, I'll have something to say about these numbers in a minute, but let's just go back to see how you have scored this. So, da, 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 and then here you add on weight. So, you're adding muted trumpet. I would say use your first player. Right? That's their job. If there is a single part to be played along with everybody else, give it to the first. You never know. What is the most likely outcome of you getting this performed if you are a break-in composer, orchestrator, whatever? Probably, if you're lucky, a semi-pro orchestra. If you're incredibly lucky, you'll get a full-scale professional orchestra. But even at that, I would still mark it the first player. A lot of times, you have a situation, or if you got a student orchestra or a community orchestra, the first player might actually be the teacher of the third, right? And and they might be saying, "All right, go for it, kid," but you might still not get the right sound out of it. Really try to go for if you have something exposed like this, if there's any risk of that player, blowing it or something like that, I would just say really make sure that you have it on the first, and just that it's in secure hands. I'm not no disparagement to second and third trumpet players out there, but you guys know the situation, right? If this might be played in a student orchestra, it's really better that the first player has got it. So you're piling on some weight onto the oboe part, and you have the English horn in the middle, and now you've got the bass clarinet below that, right? So yeah. All right, so continuing on. Yeah. I would say that when you start getting a really, really thick melody here, and the accompaniment stays the same, I've been telling people, look, make sure that the melody doesn't get overwhelmed by the accompaniment, so that people think that the accompaniment is the melody. But here you got the melody so powerful and so incredibly thick. Here you're bringing in your heavy guns, with, it doesn't matter if the bass trombone is muted. It doesn't matter if they're marked piano, but it's just that the incredible weight that you've got going on the melody now is so powerful that we miss this implied leap. Where all we're hearing is da 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 da. We're not hearing da 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 da, which you can hear really clearly in the piano part. This is why it's really important, I think, to listen to not just let my template be your guide, not just let Barvinsky's piano score be your guide, but to also let the playing of our expert virtuosos, our guest performers, as it were. And like next year, I have got a doozy of a guest performer, just a guy I've known on YouTube for a while, and who I incredibly respect, and who is just the most awesome piano player. Just has like in terms of taste, it's like there is a virtuoso expression. That's what Violina Petrochenko had here in the Barvinsky, right? So like that virtuosity of expression is really what I go for, as much or even more than technical brilliance. And I have worked with technically brilliant pianists on these, like finding the right recording that we can use as an example. That's secondary. What's really important is the expression, which is the guide to how to orchestrate it for me anyway, and I hope for you. So if you listen to the way that this is scored, there's a doloroso here, and there's a crescendo mark, which I'm not seeing either. And then there's the implied leap of the melody up to this high point, which relaxes downwards, right? It suddenly becomes more about the entire harmonization of everything. So I think what you've got here can still be saved, but I would want just a teeny bit more weight on this upper part if there could be, and I like just maybe even just in terms of adding a tenuto mark here and then a slur forwards, da. And then, of course, the diminuendo. There's also an implied diminuendo afterwards. Okay, and then right in here, you need all of your parts to be equal in dynamic strength, because here is where Barvinsky writes a new dynamic. He says piano, but this time he means piano in all parts. And here you've just once again you've added so much weight in the parts, especially like lower down here, tuba doubling with contrabassoon and double basses. Okay, all right, so it's just hugely thick and heavy right in here. And the other thing too is not only do we not have a piano dynamic joining them all together, but we also don't have any kind of There are no hairpins as there are in the original piano score in the brass and winds and so on. So they don't share this sort of fluctuation, this pulse right in here. So yeah, so it just feels a little less. I mean, I'm not going to say it feels emotionless, but it feels less emotion than we could have had because the winds and strings, because the strings and brass are not joining in to this surge. Okay. Now, one little thing here is you absolutely do not have to say one on top and two on the bottom. This is something that I'm seeing in a lot of scores all of a sudden. This is something I never used to notice, or never used to, or maybe it might have happened once or twice, but so little that I don't even recall ever commenting on it. But now I'm seeing many scores where two players are playing at once, and there are only two players on the staff, and I'm seeing one on top and two on the bottom. So you do not have to do that unless there are three players per staff, right? Like say three trumpets. So you have three trumpets, and you only have two voices. You have to tell us which two of those voices they are. But you absolutely do not have to do that with only 2 voices per staff, right? We know which one is which. You would only mark this if the second player was on top and the first was on the bottom. If it is the normal score order, the normal pitch order of those players, do not even bother, because all you're doing is cluttering up your score. And the more information that you add to a score that doesn't need to be there, the more confusion, the more possible mistakes, the more cluttering it looks. Just like the fewer of those marks that don't need to be there, the clearer your scoring, right? If I just went through and just removed all of them right now, except for this number 1 here, I think that it would just be much more obvious what's going on. You do not need to mark, you do not need to mark the different parts. You're fine. Okay. And the VZ here, this is all fine. And the string parts. So the proper cancellation of divisi is unison, right? And UNIS, period, not tutti, right? So tutti follows a solo. So if this were a solo part, like then you would say tutti, right? So it's like one person then all, right? But here divisi, tutti doesn't make any sense, because this was tutti as well. It just was divided. All the players were divided. Now all the players, see, that doesn't make any sense. Here we're divided and then we're united, right? Divided, united, unis, period. Okay, yeah, so don't use tutti. Go check out Music Engraving Tips. Justin Toki's got a great video on like solo, tutti, divisi, unison, and so on, like really outlining it. I would make one too, but like, what's the point? He made one that's probably better than what I would do, and it's also, he's got his brand of very dry wit, which is really awesome. And we actually got an entry from him a few videos ago. Check that out too. All right, so I feel this is really nice in here. Like this, the strings play the melody, da, 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 and you have this beautiful roll in the harp and the celesta. And yeah, and then this is all fine. Absolutely great. It all works and it's awesome. If you want to make this transition smoother, you can have the basses join the cellos here and then slur down, so that it really feels like the cellos are going for that low note at the same time as that they're holding the D. So that would be just one way to smooth this out. But really awesome ending section. Despite my reservations about kind of piling on to the melody here and then really getting thick right in here. I mean, it's thick, but it works. But you just might want to think about, like, what's the proportion here? Like, if, how sad do you want Barvinsky to get? And if you really want him to be sad, why don't you mention Doloroso here with the crescendo and then the implied diminuendo? Right? Why isn't this heart-yearning, these thirds that descend, why aren't they stronger or featured in some way? So think about those elements, all right? The emotional arc, right? It's more than just filling it in to make it sound bigger or have more power in that way. Just think about how everything connects emotionally, and then you can't miss. I mean, you've got a lot of the craft and you've got a lot of the ear for it. So that's not the issue. It's just an issue of proportion, right? Like what will have the greatest emotional effect. Now let's jump back to the D section. So starting our analysis with with a look at the cascading octaves. So I feel that you start off really strong here. Piccolo, slurring down to oboe and first oboe and second flute in octaves. Like right here, I would be really tempted to have you swap the roles here, so that it was the second flute got the little chirpy octaves, and the first flute had the responsibility of playing the melody I just think that that would be way more effective. Just, have your strongest player on the melody, just really having that really consistent tone, and having, like, because it really should be the second player that does like a lot of the busy work, patterns and figuration and so on and so forth. Like whenever there's a choice like this, like the way you've got your oboe set up, it's great. Now here, like, you completely did not need to write that that this was the second oboe part. The way that you have everything set up here, it's really obvious that this second voice here is the second oboe. So you don't even need to mention that here. Then right here, like, I would say, like, this is first and that is second. I'd switch them around, and then I think you just have the best result possible. Now here, Celesta, Celesta should be playing at its loudest, I think, throughout this entire passage. You have crescendo marked on these parts, and the thing is that you have 6 bars in which to get to forte. So this should be a poco crescendo, not sempre crescendo as it is in the piano score, which has an implication of being like kind of a more aggressive, gradual crescendo. But here I would say, like, just really try to have like poco crescendo, and just write out poco crescendo, and then if you want to, you can put in like in Sibelius, you can put in an invisible crescendo mark here, right? If you want to, that kind of thing. Oh, for goodness sakes! Yeah, I'm so sick of that. It's just really ridiculous. The page jumping when something is introduced or added or whatever, when we're in this mode, it's just silly. Okay. Okay. So back to the subject of the cascading octaves. I think that you have it set up really well, really audible, and you dividing up the parts here in the cellos and in your winds and so on. It really shows that that there's really a wealth of resources available in color, and that can really be added to keep things strong. If you have mezzo piano here and piano in your cascading octaves, that's okay, but just make sure that the celesta isn't so soft that nobody can hear it, right? The celesta is twice as soft as everybody else, and it will never get louder than mezzo piano, no matter how, like, everybody else's mezzo piano. You can mark the celesta forte and even fortissimo, that's fine, but, like, don't expect that to be louder than mezzo piano for the strings. And you might be thinking, well, then what do I do here when it gets to forte? Are there any options? I said, well, you can just keep your celesta in here and hope for the best. Now, here is a pitfall, okay? And that is that the octaves drop, but they don't need to drop. They drop in the piano score because the pianist is trying to keep everything in his view, right? It's like he's having this more complicated middle voice happening in the left hand, and he doesn't want the right hand to be still grabbing these upper octaves. And he also sees a real interesting opportunity for for hand over hand technique. Okay, so that's all cool, but the thing about it is that, like, you don't have to worry about that. You are the orchestrator. You've got everybody doing things, and when you have to know, right? You have to be using your ear and perceiving that when the octaves are dropped, and they're not going to stronger instruments, then like they just disappear, right? They get harder and harder to hear. So unless you're bringing in, like, maybe brass, or bringing in maybe twice as many winds or something, like, unless you're doing something to compensate for that loss of power in the drop, you might as well just keep your cascading octaves up there and just keep them where they are, right? So I would just think that maybe you need to rethink this. Maybe keep your cascading octaves up. It would be my suggestion. Like, unless you can think of a real, like a textural reason to keep them where they are. And yeah, it's really cool. Just keeping soft, soft timpani in here, and then you've got the little separate function here. It's not an anticipation, but it is a sort of a separate little note being played by lower everybody, lower winds, strings, and brass. Yeah, just a touch, right? And then you don't have any like crescendo on them. That's fine. All right, so that just leaves everything else, which is, some percussion in here. A little, maybe this is a bit much. Crash cymbal. What's the dynamic here? Piano? Is it still piano? Right? Is there any kind of crescendo to this roll? It just seems like here you say mezzo piano. So are these mezzo piano? I think you left out a dynamic, and here you're saying crescendo. Crescendo to what? Where's the there's no, in the next page the timpani part doesn't complete itself, the end of a phrase or anything. So like the crescendo is meaningless unless you give us a destination dynamic. And I would say, of course, poco a poco crescendo, not just crescendo. Just a tip in scoring dynamic markings in Sibelius. So after you have written out your nicely engraved dynamic marking, then go 2 spaces and then write out, in this case I'm recommending poco poco crescendo, right? And then it's all tied together rather than these being two separate text objects that kind of get moved around and so on and lose track of one another, right? Try to have them on one just basically as one object. Now, just my philosophy about the crescendo marking and poco a poco crescendo, anything that is over 2 bars should be poco a poco crescendo. And then anything that is just 2 bars or less, right, should just be crescendo. Most players just think, okay, yeah, so for the next couple bars I'm going to get a little louder. The next bar I'm going to get a little louder. But if you just say crescendo in 1 bar and then you have a big gap before you have another marking, especially if you have this happening before it, the player might just think, oh, well, I'm just going to get a little louder in this bar. I'll just get a little louder in this phrase, rather than the entire scope, when obviously Barvinsky intends, with the marking sempre crescendo, he really intends poco a poco crescendo on an orchestral level, right? So this just needs a bit of cleaning up in terms of the dynamics and so on. All right, so now the melody. Just the modulation here is really, really nice. And it's interesting that you have the flute melody up here, octaves with oboes, but you keep your strings down right where they are in the piano score. And I think that's actually wise. I think it's wise because it just keeps the top from being overloaded and obscuring the cascading octaves. That's like the number one reason, right? And I feel that just works just beautifully. And then you have scored the harmony part below, and you've just kept the relationships exactly where they need to be. Then here, when you go down to a lower cascading octave, you change the melody to the first violins and the middle voice part strictly to the cellos, at least in the strings. So here the bassoons. Play doubling with that, but why do we have divisi here? Was this a copy-paste error? Right? Divisi is a string marking. It is not a Divisi is a string marking. It is not a wind and brass marking. Never use Divisi unless you are writing band music. All right, so that's a different thing. When you have sections of clarinets, right? Then you might have one staff or maybe two staves of clarinets, and that represents like 24 people. In that case, you do have divisi in unison and so on. That's when you would need them. But here, like I think maybe this got copy pasted and then you left the divisi out here. But I mean, look, you don't. I mean, we know it's divisi, right? So like just make that go away. All right. So the melody and harmony continues on, and I feel it's fairly nicely scored. You continue on with your you've got your octave here, and this sort of triple octave melody with the English horn and the first clarinet playing a unison down here, and that's all right. And then you've got the this same tracking harmony from below played by second clarinet and by bass clarinet. Yeah, so I mean, I feel it's like I like if the only outcome of the drop in the cascading octaves was that you ended up shifting around the textural color a little bit with the bassoons and so on, and the cellos working together, and then I would say it's justified, it's fine, and I really like the way that you push into this place right in here, like say forte, like crescendo to forte, diminuendo. It would be nice to have like a destination for the end of this hairpin. Right? Does everybody go down to mezzo forte and then push back up again? I mean, I think this is a case where we kind of need to know how soft it gets in here. Maybe that's nitpicky, but like I just think if you have the brass coming in here at mezzo forte and pushing into the next thing, I think it's sort of useful to like have some kind of coordinating dynamic here. And do the strings get nothing of a push here when the winds do? What does that do to our strings? All right. So now we're starting to heat things up. And if there is a flaw here, I would say that like you're coming in hot with your brass, and that's good. But did you notice in the mock-up that basically all you could hear was the brass? You really couldn't hear the winds at all. So that is not a mistake. That is actually going to happen in concert. One of the reasons why is because you have your trumpets scored so damn high. You know what I mean? Like, and actually, I mean, it's justified because looking further in this section, you've got some nice high scoring in the melody and in winds and strings and so on, and horns. So the trumpet's being used here to play, all the way up to B and so on. That's okay. It's just a question of like what role are the winds playing here? Do you want a nice blend of wind and brass color? Which I assume you do. Then the dynamic here should be mezzo forte. However, that's wishful thinking, sending your C trumpet all the way up to high B here, right? So to get a proper mix, you would really have to have your winds at fortissimo, but then you use up the energy prematurely that would be going here. So you've set yourself a trap here. I don't know exactly how to fix this. It could be, seeing as how there is so much, there's really only, you just have the octaves here. Like, you could have brought in some string color here instead of wind color, right? And that could have provided a bit of a contrast, considering how now it just the winds are so important going forward from the Precipitoso, right? So yeah, it's I mean maybe just having just a brass section solo here with minimal winds might have been the solution, and just give your winds a break if nobody can hear them anyway, right? Maybe you could have gotten away with just like no middle winds here at all, and just flutes and piccolo on top there, helping to give the C trumpet, the first trumpet player, a little bit more color and power. And then what I would do in that case is like I would score it the way that this is, and then after the drop from A down to E, like when you get to this E, turn turn this into octaves, so that the first flute is doubling the piccolo, and then back to the configuration before, the way that you've got it, right? So just whenever you drop down to E, put your first flute up on the piccolo part. And then I think you would get a really nice balance. And like frankly, you just don't even need these players in here because nobody can hear them, right? What's the point? You're just sort of using up their energy. I just say just leave all this out, like the push right in here with your oboes. Just leave that out. And just go for the brass. It's fine. Like I love the way that you scored the brass in here. That's just awesome. And like all of the octaves in here are very easy to hear. I noticed that you threw in this D here, but I would say it'd be better to express the D as part of the brass chorale in here. Right? Just throw in that extra D here. Don't even bother with the violas. Nobody can hear them. Right? However, the octaves in the lower strings and the lower winds are great. They're audible. Everything is really cool about them. Could you hear one note of harp in that passage? They are just as blown away as the winds are. The middle winds are here. Get rid of them. Just let the harpist continue to scroll through their scroll through their Facebook account at that point. I know my I know my players well, don't I? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I know you guys are actually reading a book and not not looking at your Facebook. So so now let's continue on to the this place where everything goes insane, and I think you've scored it really nicely. I like the big foghorn that you've got here, second bassoon, and like once again, like everybody knows this is second bassoon. Everybody knows divisi. What's this mean? What is this? What's that? Right? Okay, so a due, that's all good. And then when you get to here, you don't need to mark anything in your bassoons. We know that this is both players, but you might want to go back to A2 here, or a due here. And then here, you've got you've got a second bassoon, as I was saying, contrabassoon. We got the same octave relationship here. We've got tuba. Couldn't spare a little bit of weight here, an octave higher on, or maybe doubling with bass trombone. They're kind of not doing anything all that important, except for just like adding one single note here. Maybe you don't even need that note. All right. So so yeah, so you've got repeated intervals in trumpets and violas. So the trumpets are going to just blow the violas out of the water. The violas could just as well be could be doubling the second violins here and getting like a stronger effect. In fact, you could have triple instruments here with the second violins playing octaves, like divisi octaves, so that the top part is supporting the first violins and the bottom part is being supported by the violas, right? So you get a really strong octave there that doesn't get blown away by the brass. And you need it because that lower voice here is being doubled by first and third horn, right? And by the way, I really like the way that you've scored this out. Except one little thing here is like once you get past this, like places where there are different rhythms in either voice, pretty much everywhere else could just have been, like just for example, like this entire part could have been scored like this, right? So like unless you have like different rhythms in either voice, like if you have a situation where it really is the same conjoined rhythm in both parts and they can all be put on the same stems, then go for that because it's so much. I mean, look at how much cleaner. I'm cleaning these up for you. So look at how much easier this is to read for the conductor. It's all about what's easy to read for the conductor and is going to be clear for the copyist. And you don't need to overdo it here with the two separate voices. Right? In fact, oops, just up to here. Right? You could completely take this approach and only break it into two voices when you get to a split in the rhythmic approach. All right. So speaking of the melody, going back to it, so adding a little bit of force here wouldn't hurt. However, there is another option, and that is you could have your first and second violins an octave higher. That way, the first violins are doubling the piccolo part, right? And the second violins are doubling the flutes and first oboe. And then the lower part, oboe, second oboe, English horn, and A2 clarinets are being doubled by first and third horn, and so on. And then second and fourth horn are playing the lowest part of the quadruple octave. So that's another way you could get a little bit more strength, because frankly speaking, your second violins are just going to get devoured by the force of the first and third horn anyway, right? Not to mention everything else you're piling on there. So, and then there's along with this second option of jumping this up here, if you accept my proposition that your violas are really kind of not doing a whole lot to contribute here, with the trumpets blasting away, then if they take this line here just as it's scored, so that you have the triple octave, this is an octave higher, this is an octave higher, and this as written is being played by violas, then you get just a little bit more of that weight. So it's like where would you like to add the weight of the violas such as it is, like to smooth things over? Like, how do they really contribute to, bop, 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 with your trumpets? Not a whole lot. So I think that like a better use of them would be supporting the third rung of your quadruple octave, and then right in here, these here you say divisi, and just like before, couldn't this all just be on the same stems, right? I mean, yes, they are divisi in this case, and that's fine, absolutely fine. That marking is great. Okay, and then the same thing here. Like, this does not need to be in separate voices. All right, the way to fix this really quickly is just to Option or Alt 1, and then type Shift Option Command or Shift Alt Control 2, and that selects out the remaining second voice rests, and then just delete them. Anyway, so I just think this is way, way cleaner and frees up some vertical space in your score. So yeah, so that's my proposal to make your overall approach here work better. And then the way that you got your winds stacked up here, that's all great, and no contradiction here to the way that the horns are really taking over and blasting away here in the middle. And the horns being in octaves here, their overtones are so powerful that they will really affect the how well you can hear the strings right in here. You will hear them, but they won't be as powerful as they could be. I mean, especially at fortissimo. Here you're kind of keeping your heavy brass down to forte, and you could have even done that to get a nice balance here. You could have even kept your horns down a little bit too. But it's all right. Fortissimo in all parts except for the heavy brass is fine with me. I would say it's okay to add like accent marks and so on. Yeah, so here you're having your second and third. So here is I like this. Just make it up a little, put it up a little bit further. So it's obviously you're not saying that this is the second and third trombone here, right? So 2, 3. All right. So that's all good, and cool little snare drum part in here, and these pushes here, keeping them occasional, not too much, right? I think that's also a really great idea. All right, and then here you bring in first trumpet when the harmony gets a little wider and so on. Yeah, so I think that all works. And then once again, like you can send your first violins all the way up to this piccolo C sharp, right, sounding an octave higher. In fact, that's kind of a fun thing to do occasionally. Just really go up and go up to a skyscraping high C sharp. No problem there. D and E, that's all fine. And here's where the violas could really be helping out, right? Covering like this note in here, keeping it strong, keeping it fluid, keeping it all more about strings and like more audible within the scope of the trumpets just blasting away here. I really like the balance that you have here, by the way. That's very cool. I think that they're going to be more of an articulation style delineated, like are these staccatos or marcato or accents or what, I think that is really important to know. And I think that I said, well, the violas are going to get blasted away by the trumpet, so you might as well have them play the melody. I think that there's a difference though. I think the cellos are stronger and they will basically shoulder their weight next to the trombones and these lower winds here. So I think that's fine. Yeah, and then bum 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 bum. What if you just didn't even have piccolo right in here, right? Because like this voice is not being doubled by anybody in the entire orchestra. Like now if you jump everybody, like if you jump up these strings the way that I was suggesting, you might think, well, okay, well Thomas wants this to jump up too, so I will be doubling the piccolo, but don't, right? This is great. I really love the focus, just the intense focus that you've got here in the middle voice here of the orchestra. So the flutes are not even going to be heard, so you might as well just leave them out, and you might as well leave the piccolo out because you're taking the focus away from that center, that real emphasized central voice. So just lose the flute family right here, okay? I mean, they're already getting hard to hear against the trumpets as you are descending, and the horns. I would say from this E onwards, they are becoming more and more difficult to hear. And if you had just wanted to, if you want to do a little switcheroo here to optimize the flute family, here's my suggestion. Let's say that you followed my advice. You had a triple octave here. Viola's taking the existing second violin parts, second violins and first violins going an octave higher. All right, so that's all in place, let's say. Okay, and you've got your piccolo and your flute descending, and it's all exciting and stuff. So here, what I would say is jump up your oboes to an A2, A2A unison right here, and jump up your flutes to play a unison with the piccolo. So the piccolo part is going to be kind of secondary and really not very strong, but the flute part will be nice and strong and will really, really support what's going on in the violins at that point. And then it will, like, you won't even notice the you can just test it out in the mock-up. You won't even notice the jumping up of the parts right in here. It'll just all be one smooth line descending, but the power will maintain after the E, right? Like that E is kind of a doorway. Like you get lower than the E, and the power starts to really drop off in the flute. Some people would even say like G, right? Or this is G sharp or F sharp. Like it would get really a lot weaker. So you could even experiment with like doing that switcheroo even a little bit earlier. Okay, but there will never be any problem with the third step, the third rung of your ladder in your quadruple octave being powerful enough with these horns sitting on those notes. All right, so so back to our main topic of interest. Da 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 da. So this is E sharp, right? Not E. So that when you put an E there, it just really spoils everything, right? Like it spoils the E that is coming up, right? You might have been thinking, well, we're headed for E. Why isn't this E? If you know what I mean. So I'm just getting to that page, but like the E sharp is actually what leads to the this open fifth here, the E and the B. Okay. All right, but not to get into harmony. So as I was saying before, you can just drop the flute family here, and just keep everything focused really on that, those lower pitches. And then I think that then you're not wasting your flutes. They might as well just rest their embouchure. And same thing with the piccolo. Like this isn't going to be heard. If it's heard, it's a distraction. If it's not, then actually better, right? So. So just really focusing in on that central voice, and then right in here with your allargando, you might even consider like possibly bringing in tenuto. Say like here's where tenuto would work really, really nicely, or tenuto staccato, or some other kind of thing where it's dragging, like it becomes heavy and dragging. So you got this ba 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 da 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 da, and then rito da 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 ba 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 ba. It's almost like some mean person, fate, is shaking their finger at this naughty little boy, this naughty teenager, Barvinsky, and his grand ideas, right? Almost feel like. But he did go on to have a great career, which, we know what happened, though, in the end. So anyway, so those are my suggestions to, like, getting the D section to be stronger all the way through. Now, finally, at last, the beginning of the piece. And I think that the way that you have it set up here is really beautiful in a way, but you just really have to watch out for things like overbalancing certain functions, right? So, for instance, here you have got bassoons and horns on the harmony part, right? So you have a combination on each voice of horn, which is twice as loud as a solo wind voice, with an additional very radiant, nicely buzzy, nicely powerful bassoon, right? So you add those two together. What's the stronger voice here? The melody or the accompaniment? So it just really feels overweighted, like bottom heavy right here. And once again, you don't need to do this. We know the top voice is the first and the bottom is the second. Nobody is going to flip these two players, right? In a functioning horn section, the second is going to be finessing their intonation under the first, right? That's like their job. That's the natural order of things. You would not mark this unless the roles were flipped for some reason. The same thing here. You don't need to mention this. Now here, first solo, with a mute, that's great. You don't need to mark solo in capital letters though, right? All you need is a small s, solo. Just like, look how clean that is, how easy to read that is. So yeah. Now, what I really love about this prologue here is that you very nicely, without having seen my evaluation criteria, anticipated that the treatment of the melody would need an emotional and timbral progression. And that's absolutely what you do here. You really progress the emotions. And in fact, I think you just really make beautiful emotional choices here. It's excellent, I like from the very beginning, you were kind of contrasting that. Something I didn't do. I reused my setup until the middle of the third bar. But here, you are kind of going to a contrast, right? It's almost like here's a one thought and here's a contrary thought, and then the two come together and then lead to a conclusion. So that's beautifully done. Yeah. So like just a matter of like what balances, what doesn't. Here you've got English horn and muted first trumpet working together. That's a beautiful blend. You have on top of that you have like clarinet, second clarinet doubling the English horn and the trumpet, and then an octave higher you have the first clarinet. And once it with divisi, why are we having divisi in a wind part, right? I think that you needed to do a little bit of editing here. Yeah, don't divisi your clarinets unless you're writing for band. And then you've got the harmony below in the trombones. See, like this is nicely balanced because it's really like the trombones and the horns is all you need. In fact, you don't even need the horns here, right? You could just get away with just the trombones because they're powerful enough. Once again, you don't need 1 and 2 here at all, ever, in this kind of scoring. All right, so this is kind of nice. The top clarinet is going to feel a little thin compared to the lower part of the octave, but that's all right. Now here's the problem. Who's going to hear these people? Right? Maybe a little bit of the celesta. But this voice in the harp against what's going on here at piano in both parts, it's just it's a throwaway. So if you want this to come through, here's what you got to do. First of all, you have to mark your celesta part up to, say, mezzo forte, right? And the same thing for the harp. And you have to have the harp doubling the same pitches as the celesta, not the same written pitches, the same sounding pitches, which would be an octave higher, right? Okay, so if you put that in and you mark up the dynamic, then you'll hear some of this right in here. But that's the only way it's going to get there. All right. Now, you may not want that to be all that loud though, because like then there's let's say that this does balance and it comes through clearly alongside all of this, then this turns into a drop of an octave, right? So that's the quandary that you're setting yourself with that. But I mean, if you're happy with it, then that's how it works. All right, so now we have doubled flute, doubled oboes. And this right in here, I think since this is a beautiful, sensitive, lush passage, you kind of don't really need to double these instruments, just to bring in an extra player and give them something to do. Except for the fact that you still you kind of go back to the same sound picture again. I think this is cool here. You don't need a duet, two trumpets here. You just need one. Excuse me. Horn players here. You just need one horn right here to do this balancing along with the cellos of of extending these pitches so that they sort of suspend into the evolving harmony, right? And they ground it, really, not suspend, but they ground the harmony so that you can sort of get the context of where things are going. And you even have that doubled in English horn, so there's no need for two horns here. It just thickens things quite fiercely. If you already have horns plus bassoons, you have horns plus you have just a horn plus English horn plus cellos, you're already stronger than the rest of the horns. So like adding a second one, it just gives a huge amount of weight to that. Right, and then here you bring in the clarinets on top of that. And, so it's really, really thick, and you haven't done anything to thicken up your melody at that point. So this is an example of what I mean when I'm saying that you are, you have a tendency to just really bolster up parts that may not quite need it, especially lower down, right? Like the accompanying parts become stronger and stronger until they become too strong for the melody, just like we had here, right? Like here, just throwing in the... it's already a little too strong for the melody. Now you throw in the clarinets as well, right? What if you did this? What if you brought in your clarinets here, like on these two notes, and then dropped out with the bassoons and continued on with the clarinets doubling the horns, right? And then brought in, like see right here, this is totally unnecessary. I would say continue on with the same horns. It's better, like they're in the place that they need to play. They should just continue on playing it, and they'll have the most control and the most smoothness. But just consider lightening things up a bit, all right? And just use the players you need to play. You already have violas and so on, like that are also adding on to this. But how much do you have on the melody here? You've got your first and second violins playing octaves alongside doubled flutes and doubled oboes. All right? And that's it. Meanwhile, the accompaniment has so much weight on it. Lighten it up. Or intensify the melody. But then if you intensify the melody, you're just becoming more and more supercharged as you go along, rather than just a continuation of the sentiment. Right? And then when you get, like, let's say you do supercharge the melody here, what happens here when you just go to strings? So just lighten up the accompaniment a little. Okay, you'll be all right. You don't need to make it so thick. Okay. So, so this is really, really cool in here. Once again, the proper cancellation of a divisi is unison, right? Looks like this. Oops. All right. So that's what you need there. All right. Da, 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 da. Yeah, this is really nice, and I really like the way that you didn't slur. You didn't just slur over the dotted rhythm, which I saw in a lot of other entries. Yeah, and you even left a little gap to make it even more precise, and that's great too. All right, and then you matched the phrasing in the strings. It's really, really nicely done. It really will have a nice contrast between the two parts. What I would say, how you could underline that is, if you're going to put a crescendo in the middle of this phrase, put a crescendo in the middle of this phrase, right? Don't crescendo here. Move the crescendo over here, right? And then just do the same thing again. And what I would do here is I would just put a crescendo here, like hairpin. Don't worry about the crescendo text. Get rid of that. Just a crescendo here, but no diminuendo. And then the same thing, don't crescendo yet. You have a diminuendo, like if you're doing crescendo then diminuendo, then just put that in. And then here put another crescendo with no diminuendo. And then you have pushed your way into this. Now, we've got an example of just really piling on. You turn this into a soft tutti, which I like, by the way. I think there's like no problem with having a big soft tutti. Okay. However, the harp and the celesta here, they're not going to be heard. Let's face it. I mean, even though you might be thinking, well, I mean, but everything's soft, right? So isn't there room for the harp and the celesta in that? No. You can hear it in the mock-up. The mock-up is not lying to you here. Okay? I mean, not to say that, like, I shouldn't just point at the mock-up and say, look at what the mock-up says, because mock-ups are notoriously unpredictable. But in this particular instance, it is not lying to you, right? That this will just be completely overwhelmed. You could try this, right? Just taking everything up an octave or even higher to just really get that kind of gleam on top, if you want. I mean, seeing as you're throwing in the piccolo, so that might be something that you could do. But like, hear these voices, even in the celesta, it's going to be really hard to hear. And with the way that you got this balance, right? Once again, mezzo forte, right? Now, what are you crescendoing and diminuendo? What are you crescendoing to, right? And then diminuendoing from? We need a destination here. See, so you've chosen to use the dynamics that are in the score, okay, and that's fine. But crescendo, I mean, it's just so arbitrary. And then like here, like piano diminuendo in the so I mean, what is going on? How big are you getting? And it should be marked here. Like, how big did the orchestra get when it got to this point? Have a destination dynamic. And here you can just, I mean, if you want to, you can leave in the crescendo mark, or you can put in hairpins if you want to. But yeah, and then just looking at this, it's really bulked up. Like just how much is playing this all of a sudden. Really has got a huge amount of weight to it. So, I mean, it's an interesting idea in a way, Noel, because like you are adding weight and you are adding power without adding dynamic strength so much. A little. I mean, I don't know what you think of crescendo being right in here. Like whether it's mezzo forte, then you're really adding some power. But if it's just mezzo piano, then yeah, then like okay, so if all you're doing is getting from crescendo, like piano crescendo to mezzo piano, and then back to here, then here's how I would restructure this. Get rid of the crescendo mark of the crescendo text, get rid of the diminuendo text, and just have a hairpin, and don't even bother telling us what the dynamic is in the middle, right? But I just think that like the text begs for some kind of clarification. If you're just going to give a little bit of force in here and then die away, then you don't need to mark what the dynamic is, but except for the fact that you're using text. I just think it's just really unclear. So, and then diminuendo to what? Right? I think that we really need to know what this is going to be. So, are you going to land on piano again or pianissimo? It would be great if you ended up at pianissimo, because I think it would be like having a pianissimo tutti. Now that is great. Okay. So just like watch out about bulking up so much, right? You could even you could have even gotten like the kind of weight that you want here and the kind of increased amount of presence without so much doubling of the functions. All right, so now we're getting into some cool stuff. Now, like once again, I would say the harp here is just completely wasted, right? Especially with all of this stuff going on. It's just and the celesta here, it's really going to get buried into the so you can't just like here. I just feel that Noel, that like you are kind of you are in danger of using the celesta and the harp as a crutch. Okay, and I don't mean for that to be insulting or anything like that. I'm just really warning you, like for this to take the sort of to take the pianistic right hand and this to take the pianistic left hand, right? I would say see how much you can get away with in the beauty of the scoring without bringing in the harp and the celesta in these roles. Because you have already beautifully orchestrated those roles on everybody else. What do we even need celesta and harp in here for? You know what I mean? Like here, you have really beautiful celesta and harp scoring, right? It just we can hear these rolls on the harp. Like these pitches are not going to come through, but the big roll at the beginning of the I would say make this a big roll. Make this a big chord too, even at mezzo forte. Roll, and you can just get rid of this and get rid of that. But yeah, just and then here, this is so gorgeous right in here. Right, this is stuff that we can really hear and really has a function. But like the stuff before, it's just like additional stuff that can't be heard, right? So that's nobody's going to hear this, with the flute family here and the strings below and adding weight here in the horns and the trumpets and so on. And nobody's going to hear this either in the even though you're trying to keep things soft here, there's just too much going on for this harp to come through. Maybe if you marked it forte, right? Fortissimo. But I mean, that's not in the character. You want this to be beautiful and graceful. You want it to graceful. You want it to be lucid, right? You don't want it to be twangy. So, yeah. So just really watch out for this kind of harp and celesta scoring, right? Because here's the other danger. What if you could make it work? What if this were the way that you approached certain passages like this a lot? Then it would sort of make everything very kind of sweet and candy-like, right? Which is also something you don't want. Obviously, look at the instincts that you've got here of, rich poetry. So, watch out. Okay, so With that pompous pronouncement and apologies, let's go on to the treatment of the figuration. Let's stick with that. All right. So right in here, I noticed that you left gaps, right? And this was one of the things in the pitfalls video that I was anticipating, right? That was that like people would literally look at left-hand parts, like the left-hand staff at the bottom, and not be thinking about the connection between the lower left-hand staff and the middle low-hand staff. The middle left-hand staff. Like, in other words, the point being, if you listen to the player, right, just really focus on what the player is saying as much as what the score is saying. So if you listen to Violina playing, you hear her left hand flowing up to the little middle voice things and just beautifully inserting them into the flow of what's going on in the other staff. So what is happening in the line, it is flowing completely across the entire thing. There's a little rest at the beginning, and then it flows and connects with all of these parts. It is always connecting. There is no gap. So why put the gap in your interpretation of the figuration? Why can't the cello get all the way up to this E, or why can't the viola play this E that is a part of the a part of the middle voice? And then why can't it play, the D? Or why can't maybe the cello play the D and then just drop back down? Like, why? And then when you get to here, why can't we go da 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 as part of the figuration? Right? Just to keep the flow, get rid of the da 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 kind of feel that you have in this. Because like this, without that connection, these two parts don't flow, right? Rest da 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 da. Da 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 da. I mean, why not da 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 rest da 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 da. Do you see what I'm saying? You're missing an opportunity. And then when you get here, you right? So you completely get it here. So why can't everything be that way? That's what I'm suggesting or pointing out. Because that's what the piano score says, right? It's just that we don't see that when we really just look at each staff as a separate thing rather than listening to the pianist connect it, right? So that's really the crucial thing. Please let the pianist be your guide, all right? That is so important. And especially Violina, we lucked out. We got so damn lucky having her as our guest pianist. I was originally going to have her. There was a Ukrainian composer that I thought about having as what we would orchestrate. But then Barvinsky, like I heard Violina play Barvinsky, and I just thought that is it. That is going to be our piece. But Violina also played the other piece I was considering. But God, just. When she plays technical stuff, she's spot on. But like the virtuosity here is in the expression, right? So just really listen to the nuances and the colors in the piano playing and try to bring some of those connections in. Even like a simple thing like this, right? Just really, and it'll improve your scoring so much. Like like a lot of these things, like I'm taking it apart and saying, you missed this, or maybe this is better than that, and so on. And it's not an attempt for me to like say that I know how to score things better than you at all. It's just a question of like, how can we take the approach that you've got here and just make it sing? Because for the most part, your approaches really work, right? I'm making comments about like how like you thicken things up pretty intensely sometimes, but like even the thickening makes sense in a way, right? So it's a question of like, can we lighten things up from time to time? But the overall approaches, the decisions, the artistic context and everything, Noel, I mean, it's really great. So yeah, so please don't misunderstand the thrust of my comments. They really are just intended to like, how can we make it even stronger? That would be immediately strengthen and the beautiful flow that you want to achieve here with your lower winds and lower strings. And then continuing on with that, like it's so easy to just put power into that. You don't even need the harp. Who cares about the harp here? It cannot contribute. Like if you're pushing to mezzo piano and then to mezzo forte and so on, and the sound picture is getting thicker and thicker, and that's actually kind of nice. So like, who cares? Like, the harp does not even need to be there. And the same thing is true of the celesta, right? You already are getting all this beautiful color out of your upper winds and upper strings and so on. Celesta, you don't need it. You don't need it. It is at best a mezzo piano instrument. So the orchestra has to be soft and it has to be sparse if you really want to hear the celesta clearly. And I would say the same thing is pretty much true of the harp. All right. So no problems on this screen with the with the reservation of the harp, with the figuration. And I like the way that you are bringing in like some of these lower notes, like emulating the sound of the sustain and so on. It would be like, I think that if you're going to just have a solid downbeat, then that is what can happen in your double basses too. Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful that this does not completely obscure what's going on down here. All right. All right, so interpretation of the melody. Yeah, so here we have two flutes, oboes. And right in here, I mean, once again, I wonder, do you need to double these players? Because like doubled oboes is not necessarily louder, and it's not twice as sensitive either. It is half as sensitive because the players have to control how much natural expression they use, so that it doesn't sound too wacky. Like they don't stop matching. And then with the flutes, you get a breathier sound. It's got that kind of more edgy quality. And not necessarily as tuneful and limpid and everything else. So I would say, like, when you bring in the violins, the divisi octaves here in the violins, like that would be the place where I'd thicken them up. Maybe they can, since you're stripping down to just a clarinet here, clarinet harmony, then maybe that these players can just stay solo, right? So it's just a kind of a question, though, like how long, how much do we want this to be, these octaves to continue on working together, right? Was there some other choice you could have made here that would offer an alternative to what happened before? But anyways, the way that this opens out is really gorgeous. Bringing in these players. I wouldn't call this a solo. Here you're saying like this is. Yeah, this trumpet part right in here, second player solo. And then here, yeah, so just because it is a single voice here doesn't make it a solo. You have so much stacked around it, right? So if this were a solo, then the conductor would have to make space for it in the rest of the orchestra. And obviously you don't intend that. You just want this to be part of the melody. You want it to be a single player. And once again, don't give it to the second player. That's not their responsibility. It's not a question of like giving somebody a break. I feel really bad for the second horn or the second trumpet player or whatever, the second flute player like Dvorak. I'm going to give him a lot of solos, or I'm going to give him a little chance here, or whatever. So don't do that unless it's within the context of the person's part, right? To give you an example, I had my very first orchestral composition here in New Zealand, which still gets played a lot. I mean, when you consider the ballet performance, it's had over 20 performances now. So my wife was actually in the premiering orchestra, and so I wrote a part for her that, I wrote a little solo, but I put it in the context of something that a second horn player would play, right? And then, but that year we were, we were living together in San Francisco, and she was taking a break from the orchestra, but she had contracted that she would play that concert when we went back to New Zealand for a month or so during the summer. And but because of the seniority rules and the way that the parts got allotted and so on, like she was on fourth instead of second. But I think I can't remember. I think that the second player said, okay, like why don't you play that part right there? It's something like that happened. I can't remember. So she did get to play it, but it was within the context of a role that, it was like an instrumental role that the second player would have done in the natural course of events. Here, I don't see that anything about this that really demands that a second player would be playing this, like, with the first being busy doing a melodic part or some other kind of thing. So look, don't give your solo parts to the second player. That's the first's job, right? They're the leader of the section. They will, like the first will play this, and they'll be, there might be some intonation problems with some other players and so on. So, like, once again, they're going to bring their beautiful ear into, they're going to be playing this in a way that will set things up so that it'll help to correct the ship. And then the other players will be listening to them and they'll come in here, right? So that's just an example of how the first would be the preferred player. Not just because of seniority, but because of, like, their abilities, right? And also, like, oftentimes you'll have a solo or not a solo, but like a featured part or a single melody or something where the first is going to, like, is playing in context with the other players in the orchestra or in the brass section, with which they are also have a sort of a partnership in nailing certain intonation problems and working together in articulation and other stuff, right? So even further reason, like, the first player should be playing along with at the same time that the first horn player comes in and so on. So yeah. So anyway, so just watch out about reassigning things like that. So trumpets. Being doubled by oboes here, and then the flute and the piccolo and so on. That's all right. Yeah, and then here it just really gets intensely thick, but it's all right. It's like this part did not bother me so much in its thickness. It's just a question of like maintaining the meaning, right? Yeah, and then like some of this stuff, the coordination of the here's where the adding so much weight to the bass here, like, kind of makes certain points that you're trying to make a little strange, like the gap here, right? So if we have a heavy D here in your tuba, then what's the point of the rest here, right? Same thing, a heavy really low E in the tuba. What's the point of the rest here? And how does that obscure the flow, like how the flow starts in your lower parts here? So those are things I just would really watch out for. And then here you go to more harmony as the melody, or as this whole part starts to get stronger and stronger, and your brass are starting to stick out more and more. You go to harmonized strings. So I would try to stick to octaves. Like the more, in fact, the more intensely harmonized things become in the brass, the more I think you should stick to octaves in your melody parts, in the winds and strings, right? But I mean, this B6 is really beautiful, I've got to say, but and you're trying to keep things a little separated here with the trumpets. So I'll sort of give you that one, but I'll just say watch out in cases like this. All right, so now we're headed for the B section. Wow, this is turning into a really long, detailed evaluation. I was going to make this one shorter because I've got to eat breakfast soon. But yeah, I didn't feel like you needed me to hold your hand or anything. I think your orchestration's great. I don't know if you need this much detail. But yeah, so you're continuing on. I really love the combination of bassoon and English horn here, and the violas and cellos. I think this really, really powerful, and it keeps the focus up. Now, my favorite part about this entire thing is the contrasting, between the trumpets and here you push into the horn parts. That is so gorgeous. Essentially covering the same kind of stuff. and and then here you're sort of harmonizing this and so on. I mean, you could get away with having harmony and the upper strings and having this as octaves. Excuse me, harmony in the upper winds and just straight octaves in the strings. But I think that this also works really really nicely. Yeah, and then see like here you have these lower parts rest note, right? I think that works better. Yeah, and a little roll into the next thing. Yeah, these just really just nice stuff going on here. Yeah, and then the contrast between tuba accompanying trumpets and bass trombone accompanying the horns. Of course, like the swapping between these would actually be better in terms of supporting the timbre, right? Because you would have like conical brass together. If you put the bass trombone part here alongside the C trumpet, but like I can see the like maybe if the rationale is just that you want this low A to not be so squashy or so like kind of very trebly, right? So I get the possible reasons why, but still, right? The conical brass would go together better along with the cylindrical brass, just like more seamlessly, right? And then you pull away here; it's really nicely done, and then this big gorgeous roll in harp and celesta. See, like here, coming into its own, fading away here in the strings, letting it be more about the winds, and then the parts as they go upwards, they absorb the winds that are continuing to hold and so on. Yeah, it is really nicely done, and the trading off between the parts, that's all fine with me. I would definitely mark this part solo here. Just a little caveat here, like this works all right. You're going to have the hands roll upwards, and then the left hand's going to jump down and start playing this, and that's all good. Okay, just watch out about doing something like this right after a big hand over hand roll, right? So like you haven't done that here, but I could see that happening. So what if somebody had like this big beautiful gushing hand over hand roll, and then afterwards there was this arpeggiated part? Like the person's left hand may be way at the top of the chord, and then they have to jump over and start playing this. So maybe not quite as convenient if that were to happen. But of course, you don't need that because you've got the celesta too, and you've got everybody else. So yeah, so I think that this works really nicely. And about my only question about this is that do you really want the same thing to happen twice, right? Do you want this to be just softer, right? I would, but speaking of dynamics here, I would definitely balance this out. Have the harp, dynamics should always go in the middle, even with this kind of thing. Unless you've got a lot of cross staff stuff. In that case, you put it on the bottom. Okay. I would definitely have the harp play mezzo piano here, or even mezzo forte, right, accompanying the winds. Yeah, it's pretty heavily doubled and tripled here, but it's still all right. And the dovetailing and so on. I think that all is fine. Okay, so here like everything drops down, and like here I would have like at least piano, if not mezzo piano, in your harp. So, but I mean, back to my question: do you just want the same thing to happen twice, or do you want some kind of contrast? Maybe the strings could take over, a solo violin, or celesta, or some other thing that contrasts what happened before, right? So here you really lean into this, which in the piano score is just like this wandering melody. So I mean, does it need this much weight on it? Is my question, because you really are bringing in some heavy ass brass here. Like yes, the clarinet and oboe and English horn and so on are working their way downwards. And then we're adding kind of like an additional octave with some of these instruments. I would say I think you completely do not need third trumpet in here. Okay, the second and third trumpet, or first and it's hard to tell who's doing what here, but yeah, I would just, if you're having a back and forth like this, just kind of leave it between the, two of these players. Don't worry about this having to be third because it's low. Your first player can play it. It's better just to, have the two players playing off each other, or even maybe just the entire melody played by one player going all the way through. That's their job. They should be able to play this entire thing. But I think that after this note, you don't need trumpets at all. I think you could just completely get rid of that because you've got enough going on in your trombone, right? Yeah, and then bass trombone. I would rather you just had this entire part be first trombone, trading off to second trombone, rather than bass trombone. I just think it's just a better blend. Like that, you don't need that kind of stressed sound of bass trombone in its higher register. Yeah. So I think that I think the orchestration is okay. I just like you just have to think about the character of what's going on there in the score, right? In the piano score. Like Barvinsky is letting go because he's setting up the next section. But it just seems so intense right in here. I'm just wondering if that combines with the spirit of what's going on. All right. So last part, I promise. Then I get to go eat lunch or breakfast. It's going to be lunch if I don't stop soon. But still, this is an awesome lecture. I'm just feeling so energized. We're getting into the home stretch here, and I've got this is number 1 out of 5 scores to go before I get to the end. So I love the how you have once again anticipated my my interpretation of this section, calm surface over restless undercurrent, right? So we've got the undercurrent here in low winds. I think low brass work really, really well here, and low strings. And I like the apportionment of the parts. Which players playing what part at what time. I think that all works fantastically well. And I also like the restlessness of these very soft rolls in all these parts. I think that works beautifully well. Okay, and then here you get more emphasis on the eighth, especially with the timpani going back and forth. So that is beautifully orchestrated. And then here, like great minds think alike. Ha ha. You have chosen to score this in the brass as softly. There's this beautiful little chorale in here. Chorale, CHOR, CHORALE, chorale. Somebody put a comment, I think a few months ago, maybe 8 months ago or something, under a comment. It's like spelled choral, CHORAL, not chorale, CORRAL. I was like, yeah, okay, dude, but it's a chorale is the idiom, right? is the way that a choral part would be interpreted on instruments, right? So they're playing a chorale. All right. Anyway, not a corral where you put your horses. Okay, but this is really, really nice. The trombone and the horn in the middle and this really feels a lot like brass quintet, brass sextet kind of scoring. It's or brass quartet scoring even. But of course, like you wouldn't have 2 trombones, you'd have 2 trumpets, right? So that's why I was thinking sextet. In a sextet, you might have 2. Actually, in a sextet, you might have like 3 trumpets and 3 trombones, right? Or you might have 2 horns, 2 trumpets, 2 trombones. But it's this is really nice. Just beautiful sound. And then here you shift the texture, the linear texture to from the trombones. You go to the lower horns in here, and and then everything else kind of stays the same. So and you don't need to tell us who's who here, right? I would totally not go to second trumpet and then third trumpet and then first trumpet. Just let the players, let this be the first trumpet's responsibility, okay? They don't need a break. And the second and third player don't need to play this to be validated. Just let it all be first trumpet. You get the best sound that way, okay? And then you set up the next part, and we've already talked about that. So yeah, so great score. I'm gonna stop now. I'm having too much fun. It's like, I have to stop sometime. But such a cool score, and thanks so much, Noel, for sending me that and putting so much work into it. It was really an excellent full length interpretation of this. And and of course, thanks so much for supporting on Patreon at the highest level possible. And and of course that support made its way into our contribution to the Lisa Batiashvili special appeal for Ukrainian musicians, which I got a really nice Merry Christmas and thank you card from them just this morning. So that's up on Patreon. I guess by the time this will be posted, it will have been yesterday, or it'll have been earlier today. So thanks so much for helping out with that, and helping out the channel, and also to all my Patreon folks out there who also participated. And we ended up raising a little bit more money for them, and I'll have some more information about that next month at the special Wingding, the finale party, which I still have not set a date for. I think it's going to be early February. I'd like it to be in January, except for the fact that I have to come back from vacation and hit the ground running because I've got to score an opera first thing this year. So the fun never ends. But neither do the uploads here on Orchestration Online, I have to say. And all of the cool resources I'll be sharing, and some of the courses and books that I want to write over the next couple of years. So I'll have more information about that too coming up. But look, thanks everybody. Thank you. I mean, some of my website subscribers and regular viewers also chipped in their own way. Some people made individual donations to the fund, and some people also just spread the word, and it was all really helpful. Thank you guys so very, very much. I really appreciate it. And thanks for, being part of the community and being so awesome. I mean, you guys are sharing stuff, improving each other, growing together, making connections, professional and personal, and I think it's really amazing. And we're just really looking forward to it, but I'll be taking a holiday soon, and I'll have more to say when I come back, and maybe I'll have a little holiday message at the end. Maybe I'll post in a couple of days just before I go off. So thanks again, Noel, and there will be about 3 or 4 more posts tomorrow, video posts tomorrow. So watch out for those. All right, see you guys really soon.